The first question was about educating our younger population about the importance of doctor visits and what's being done with that. Not enough, to be honest with you. I did a diabetes education class yesterday at my church in Virginia, and one of the people that came to that class asked a similar question. Unfortunately, so that has to be a team effort. It can't be just me. It has to be the parents, because I know we're living in a different society now where everything's rushed. Parents working, versus like when I was growing up, my mom didn't work. She took care of the house. So we always had a home-cooked meal there, and she really regulated what we did. A lot of two-parent households, if there are two-parent households, everybody's working. So quick things that unfortunately are not healthy. Educating the young folks has to be, to me, the docs, the parents, the extended family, and the school systems, because the school systems are not promoting as much as they should. My foundation in Norfolk, my wife helps me with that, and she actually has these hydroponic towers we put in their school systems to try to get them to learn about how to eat better. So some of it is going to have to be on education, but it has to be a team effort. We don't put the kind of time in like I think we should. So I think that's something that you bring up an excellent point, but it has to be a concerted effort that we really push in our government officials as well, because some of that's the issue there. On the issue of prostate cancer, we still don't know why. That's the unfortunate reality, because it's hard to develop a cause unless you see trends. But there's so much variability. I don't know if it's exposure to things or if it's genetics. We really don't know. I would not doubt that there probably is some exposure issues that we just don't really know, but I don't know that for a fact. And I have my good dear friend is actually the president of his oncology group, and he and I have had this discussion a couple of times, and last time he and I talked maybe a few weeks ago, and I brought this question up in the same almost identical way, and he said, we don't really know. But yeah, I would not doubt it's multifactorial, but I would not doubt there's some exposure issues we just don't really realize yet. So the question is, since most people may only go to the doctor once a year, what do they do at the other times? Well, the first thing is, to me, I tell people all the time, understand your health care, like you individually. What are your challenges that you have, be it either lack of exercise, be it weight, be it hypertension, whatever. And understand what your challenges are and set yourself a plan of action to address it. Most times you'll find that weight is one of the big things, and then some of these chronic conditions that you'll find. Like I tell patients all the time that, when they have hypertension, get your home blood pressure monitor and check it. I have folks that they'll put up in their closet, stay there for 10 years. I say, you got to pull it down, you have to put it on, you have to check your pressures. I tell people, once you know your pressures are good, and I would define that as the target we're looking for is less than 120/80 is what we look for. There is some, you have to understand blood pressure is very variable, and that it could go high 1 minute, low the next based on what you eat. If you go to, say, some fast food joint and get some meal there, you check your pressure an hour later, it's going to be higher because of what you had. So I tell people, if you check it in multiple times, you're not check it like every 5 seconds or anything, but at least a few times a week would help that. So that part, and then your activity. Make sure you're doing the exercises prescribed, shoot for the weight that you're supposed to shoot for, and I guarantee you'll see some turnaround, and that can help you in those off times. Just understanding your health and the things, and you really want to have your doc kind of go through that with you. If you're only seeing him once a year, he really should help guide you to what you could do outside of their office visits to make sure you're staying in good health. I don't think we do as good a job with that as we should, but that's what we should do. Yes, sir.
You have to have something inside of yourself where you're driving self-care, self-appreciation, self-love, whatever, it's intrinsic motivation. So that, to me, seems to be the larger obstacle, because, and that's why I like your point about family, because there's a support system which has an aspect of compliance and behavior change. So I want to take all that down to your opinion about what's the best way to build an internal awareness and accountability in each of us as individuals and maybe in support groups, etc., buddies, barbershop talk, that causes us to get past the individual role that nobody can do for us to actually change our behavior.
Well, that's probably the question of the century, and I think that's an important question. The tough part is getting people to look at it as a valuable part. Health is really your valuable asset, your good health. What I have tried to get people to do, and I've done this with my men, I was joking before we started this thing, when I see patients in the office, I do like when, that could be, and listen, sometimes women could be kind of bad too. It's not just a man thing. But when I get them in the office, I usually look at the facial cues of the spouse, whoever's there. So because you ask men, how you doing today? They always say, I'm fine. That's the standard answer. And I always look at the wife when they say that. And I look for her facial cues. How does she look? What does she do? I see her eyebrows go up, or I see a frown come on. I know what the deal is, and I dig more. But I've learned to do that anyway, because you have to. But the thing I try to tell most men and women, I said, when you are a spouse, I said, once you say I do in front of God, you take on another person as a partner in your life. Men that I've had to, they'll say things to me like, well, it's my life, my responsibility, my choice. I said, no, it's not. When you said I do, it wasn't your responsibility, your choice anymore. Your responsibility is to live for your spouse. That's because you took her on as a partner and somebody you said an oath to God you were going to be there to honor and care for her. I said, and when you go take this approach you're doing now, that's dishonoring God, because that's not what you're supposed to do. You can't be that selfish. I try to throw the guilt trip as best I can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I try my best to tell people that, that kind of sense of family, of your level of responsibility. I'm like, especially you got young kids, that you have to raise, and you're going to leave them early because of your choices. How selfish can you be? So I try. You kind of almost, I find I have to hit different people up differently based on my understanding of them and what they deem as important. But I usually try to throw the guilt trip on them about that. But each individual person, and the reason why I bring these topics up is, sometimes when they hear something that may trigger a thought, that they may say, okay, maybe let me go and get on my job and get this thing done. So each person is different in how they respond and what have you. So that's a tough question, but I think repetitive reinforcement of information and really holding people's feet to the fire. Because if somebody comes in and their weight hasn't changed or their blood pressure is still high, and I know they're not doing what they're supposed to do, I'm going to challenge them, to be better. Because I say, again, your role is to get better. You come here, you do your copay, you do all this other stuff, you get in this medicine you ain't half taken. I say, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of all this if it's not for your good health? I say, a lot of things, we can do a lot of things without medication. And I tell people, I'm not a big pill pusher. I use them when I think it's necessary. But lifestyle change can impact so much on that. But that takes, like the village raising a child scenario. So it does take family. It takes you individually recognizing it's an issue, and it takes me presenting the problem out there. And maybe sometimes, that's where that relationship building comes into play. I talk junk because that's what I do. I mean, I've developed relationships with my patients, and I've had the ability that I can talk trash to them because of the relationships I've built over the years. And I'm a firm believer in that, because again, when you talk about your health, that's not easy to talk about all the time. And that aspect of listening to somebody when you're going to do something you don't really want to do, like take medicine or change some things around, you have to have somebody you feel is telling you that because it's in your best interest. I have people would think, like somebody say, all these doctors give us these drugs because they get something out of the deal. I'm like, well, show me, because I ain't got no check. So I missed that one. But the law states we can't take any of that stuff. I mean, 20, 30 years ago they could, but not anymore. That's all against the law. So it's not, I'm not getting anything out of that. What I'm getting now is seeing you live longer. So I think, that relationship building has to happen for you to listen to your doc and to really take heed of what they're saying. And that's not always easy to do. Some people don't have that skill set. Some people do. But I think that's the best way I can answer that question.
My thought is like whether you grow up lower middle class, upper middle class, I don't know a lot of rich black people, but when you grow up, you're 13, 14, and you have these concerns, you're considered soft if you address them. Yeah, we're 55, 60, of course you're going to talk about it. Now you're 60 years old. The question is, where do we meet the community where they're at a younger age, as men with nephews, with sons, that is okay, whether you talk about mental health, depression, suicide, obesity. I know you and I worked on a project before, like the barber shop. Right. There's a black man's place where they can not necessarily be vulnerable, but they can be themselves. So other than addressing these issues, what are some of your solutions that you?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we haven't quite figured out yet. It's the cross-generation stuff. And I remember what I was like when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I didn't see any need at all to talk to a doctor about anything. In fact, in those days, not only was I going to live forever, but I thought I could fly. I thought I was Superman. And of course I found out later that wasn't the case. The way I like to think about this is my barber, DJ is 40, and long story short, he offered me some delicious looking pastries that he was giving out at the barbershop. And I was like, oh man, you looked in the mirror this morning, you said you're going to do the right thing. So I declined these big, scrumptious looking cookies. I said, I can't. And he wanted to know why. And so then that's when I told him about my diseases. Now, earlier in my life, I wouldn't have told him anything because I'm keeping it all in, because I'm Superman. So he asked me the great question. He said, oh, Woody, so how old do I have to be before I have to stop eating junk food? And I just looked at him and said, right now. You're 40 years old, you're in good health. This is when you need to stop eating junk food. And I said, I wish I had stopped eating junk food when I was 40. I wouldn't have the things chasing me today. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, is that we have to, those of us with the gray hair and who've been through this and are fortunate enough to still be on the planet into our 60s and 70s, we really need to push hard to talk to the younger men. I mean, it's really up to us because they're not thinking about it. And so that's why, things like the barbershop that we're trying to put together, where you get the older guys and the younger guys and just try to sit those younger guys down and just tell them the truth. And they got to hear it over and over again. And, so I do talk to my barber, DJ, periodically about his health. I bring it up. And I think that's what we have to do. I mean, that's a great question. We don't have it figured out. One time we did sorry I'm going on. I told you I have no discipline with this. But one time we set up men's health recruitment on campus at the University of Michigan. Wanted to talk to the young guys. It was like, first day of classes or something like that. Big old sign, men's health, stop here. How many young men do you think came by our table? I'll tell you. Well, she says 1, you say 4 or 5, I'll say 0. But guess who was coming by talking to us? The women. I mean, we talked to a whole lot of women. They were like, yeah, what's going on with y'all? Like, I don't know. I mean, this is unacceptable. I do take my wife with me to every doctor appointment. It took me like 30 years to figure out that was a good thing to do, because before I'd be like, I don't need anybody's help. I'm glad I got over that. She goes with me to every appointment, and then after it's over, I ask her, okay, what just happened? You know, what did the doctor say? But my point is that it's really not the responsibility of women to keep us alive. It's our responsibility. Now, of course, I'll accept all the help I can get. But it's my job, it's your job to do what you have to do to stay alive.
Is there an age where it really doesn't bother them? Or would it be a weight on it later on in life? Or is their system good enough to handle it right now?
There's always going to be a weight on anyone. Salt, it's not that it's so much as bad as just we don't know how to cut it off. You know, everything is like super salted. And one thing I did want to dispel is the rumor that like Himalayan salt is different from black salt, which is different from white salt, and it's all the same. You know, salt is salt is salt. The only difference is no salt has no salt. It's potassium based. But any salt has its limitations. Look at salt like, it's almost like a sponge. I don't know I know some of us were morbid kids. We go out there, find them slugs and pour salt on them and watch them shrink down. You know, the reason that happens is because salt is electrically charged, so it pulls water and it holds on to that water, so it pulls it out. So when you consume salt, you hold on to water, and that's what raises your blood pressure, because really part of, you think about what's in blood, it's just water, plasma, and cells. So the water part increases, and that's so the heart has to generate more pressure to push all that around. One of the things with that is understanding the amount. So, you know, really, we have just been trained to use salt. I mean, this is all, because you go other places, other countries don't use it like we do. We've just been trained to use as our kind of our litmus test of what we like and what we don't like. The problem, especially in the African American community, especially women, interestingly, women are super salt sensitive. If you look at who has the highest incidence of, like when you talk about hypertension, problems associated with black women due to salt intake. Now, you know, that's going across the board to all races. Everybody can have an issue with sodium. It's just African American women have a higher incidence of salt sensitivity, but men do as well, just more in women. So it's, no matter what age you are, it has potential. But of course, when you're younger, you haven't had a chance to mess things up yet. This is when you get older. But what I'm seeing is younger and younger kids with hypertension. I mean, I don't take care of kids. I mean, I'm an adult cardiologist, but I do take them as young as 16. But I'm seeing kids 12, I'm hearing, 11, 10, you know, and don't let people try to make it sound like when people are overweight. We want to come up with this idea there's some fat gene out here. That gene is eating too much. I mean, because if you look at families, they'll say, well, you know, my father was big, my mom was big, this is genetic. No, all y'all eating too much. I mean, the keeping it real is just, that's a learned behavior, you know, and that's the tough part. I mean, we all have challenges, you know. I mean, Collin just was able to, you know, take care of his, but we all have challenges in life. It's just a matter of facing that challenge, understanding it, and trying to do something about it. Unfortunately, so we tend to like to make excuses for what we do, and that then we never really achieve the ultimate goal we need to do, which is that better health. I always say to people, meet the challenge head on. You know, recognize you have an issue, and then work to try to see, how do I correct it? Because we can always make excuses for ourselves. You know, I had a lady the other day, she's 410 pounds, and she's mad at me because I couldn't give her a pill to make her lose weight. I mean, and she said, of course, the standard, you know, and I know again, you know, I told you got to laugh around with some of this stuff, but standard African American answers when you talk about what you eat, they're all, every large person says the same thing. All I eat are salads. And I'm looking at them like, really? I mean, you know, I'm like, this is the kind of stuff, and I tell them, I said, listen, first you got to face that you have an issue. You're not eating just salads. I'm telling you that right off the bat. I mean, you're doing more than that, and that's okay, but recognize the issue and figure out a plan on how to address it. And I think that's the thing that I'm bringing up some of these anecdotes while we're talking, because I want you to know this is the stuff that we deal with every day in the medical community. But I'm bringing this up because some of you may be able to relate to some of this stuff. But these are the challenges we have, is trying to understand what we have to deal with and how to deal with it. That's that help part that Woody brought up a second ago. These are the important things, to understand you have an issue and how to get the help needed to achieve the goal, because keeping it to yourself may not necessarily lead to that good outcome you want to have.
Gentlemen, thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm glad that the conversation continues, because if we don't repeat this story, it can't be a one-hit wonder. It has to be repetition associated with it, so that people actually eventually get the message. Let me just combine the last conversation, labels and what we consume. Over the last 50 years, the sugar content and what we consume in this country has gone up 300%, and you can measure that from the 50s, looking at what was in French's mustard and every other thing, Heinz 57 ketchup, anything on the shelf. You see the labels, John. John's my patient, he's well educated. The labels say what the sugar content is, which in the Detroit community, we now think it is just as bad as the salt story. The sugar content is on the label, then it has added sugar. And that added sugar, especially in liquid form, is just notorious for our patients who are diabetic and hypertensive. So this is a very important point to get across, because we're doing it to ourselves. They say they're eating salads, but they're drinking Pepsi and Mountain Dew and lemonade and iced tea and everything else in a liquid form that kind of negates the benefit of any salad that I know of. So thank you so much for an outstanding presentation.
What about sugar in the sense of honey or agave? You hear different people talking about different sweeteners, but do they have the same effect, and would you recommend one over the other?
Well, of course, white sugar is going to be processed, so it take a lot of the nutrients out of it. Honey is probably one of the better sweeteners. I'm not a big fan personally, because that's an acquired taste, but it has it's more of a complex carbohydrate, so it's going to give you more energy for a longer period of time than some of the other sugars will. But anything processed is really bad. Just like you talk about white bread, white rice, sugars, anything that's white is going to be processed, and unfortunately so, it's going to be not so good for you health-wise. It's cheap, and that's where we run into the issue. People would say oftentimes it costs too much to eat healthy. And it's not that it costs too much, it's just understand the right choices to make. Rice is not expensive, but you don't want too much of anything. The biggest problem we have here in this country is portion size. We haven't learned how to trim down that piece. Everything's biggie size. You do this, do that, and it just increases in size. But I think if you look at sugar, the brown sugar and honey are the bestest, because they're not processed. So they're not going to take everything out this good and leave the bad stuff fully behind. A lot of people have different comments about artificial sweeteners. My wife's totally, she fusses at me every time I get near a Splenda pack. She wants me just using stevia just because of the kind of general nature of these artificial sweeteners, and it's not. I'm still understanding the data behind it, because I don't see. For me, I came out of Duke University, so Duke is research driven. Everything is about what the data shows. So, I tell people all the time. I said, listen, they ask me about like certain over-the-counter things. I'm like, well, there's no data to support it. You could do it. I don't think it's going to hurt you any. I just can't support it because I haven't seen that information in clear, concise terms that is tried and true research, double-blind, randomized clinical, trials. So we haven't seen that. So all I can go on is what I read, but just be careful. And I would say everybody here, watch the Dr. Google stuff, Because remember, the internet is a very unregulated source of information. I could put anything I want up there, and nobody could really debate it because, I mean, it's there in black and white, but that doesn't make it so. So you want to look at different, you want to go to trusted sources that you know, like I tell people, like Mayo Clinic has a good website, you know, Cleveland Clinic has a good website. You know, a lot of big institutions have them, you just have to find them. And then look at that as your, and then you want to look at multiple sources, and I think that could help you with that. But I would say anything that's white is not right. I know that some people in this country may differ on that one, but I'm a full believer in that. Everything that's white is not right. So, and that kind of stuff is clearly that.
I'd like to take a brief shot at that question from the perspective, not as a physician, but just as a patient and somebody who has been struggling for 30 years with diabetes. So I don't know if there's anyone else in the crowd today who has type 2, but if you do, you know, this is what I've learned over time, day by day. It's a consistent struggle. And of course, it's how much I move my body around. That's very important. But it's also what I put in my mouth. Think back on my story about, you know, me talking to DJ, my barber. You know, I really wanted that chocolate chip cookie, but I couldn't. So here's the bottom line for me. I'm always on guard for carbohydrates. You know, I love bread, but bread is not my friend. And the reason I know about white rice and cookies and even all the deceptive things, like I was eating those Cliff Bars because I saw the man on front of the thing and he was climbing a mountain. I was like, oh, I know this is good for me, you know. And then one day I looked at the back, and then I got something called a continuous glucose monitor. I wish I could show it to you, but you know, this thing is in my arm and it communicates with my phone. So I always, a CGM, right? Somebody said that. So I always know where my blood sugar is. And the number one thing we learned from our research in Flint, Man Up to Diabetes, was that most of the guys who had diabetes never knew what their blood sugar was because they did not want to prick their finger. If it were up to me, I would somehow find enough money to give everybody a free continuous glucose monitor. Because once I had that thing and I would eat something and my blood sugar would spike to 250, guess what? That was all I needed to know, that you can't mess with this stuff. Now, if I decided to go ahead and break my rule and eat it anyway, I was a little better prepared. So maybe I would go for a walk beforehand or after. So all this stuff works in combination. My feeling is salt and sugar are my enemies. They are evil. And they are trying to take me out. But guess what? They're just doing what they do. And I've got to fight back against it. Dr. Newby said this is a capitalist situation, so there are people who are producing food for us, and in my opinion, a lot of that food is not healthy. But until we can figure out how to eliminate that, I've got to fight this battle day by day by day, myself, by making good decisions.
Thank you. This question, I think, is for mostly, I'd say, Collin. I'm terrible with names, so I apologize for not being clear about it. First, an immense thank you for both you and Woody, but immense thank you to you for the power of the testimony, I guess I would call it, that you shared about your personal journey. Very, very powerful. I think part of the reason there may have been a pause after you finished is because I was just kind of still absorbing the impact of your transparency about your life. So big, big thank you. I want to turn to one of the issues you raised, I think, that cuts through a lot of the earlier discussion about the difficulty that black men have in changing behavior by really starting inside. You mentioned a tool, because we talked about the power of groups, group support, relationship, marital support. but there are other tools out there. And I believe you mentioned journaling, which is something that I have done a very significant amount of my life and found it immensely helpful, because in a simple idea that I want you to take further if it makes sense to you. If you have difficulty talking to your buddies or your spouse, you can have inner dialogue with yourself that is enhanced and made more clear and easier to own if you're willing to write it down. So if that makes sense to you, can you elaborate a little bit more, and perhaps others in the audience or on the panel can offer more of the importance of tools, of which, being out in nature is a big deal as well. So, but around journaling, if you will.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your comments and for your question as well, and for being here. Thank you. Journaling helped me significantly. I still journal, not as often as I used to, but maybe twice a month, just to kind of as a general check-in and kind of chronicle where I am. One of the things that I did in the past was I wrote a letter to myself when I was an undergrad in college, and I tucked it away, and when I was 5 years later and I graduated, I got it out, and I was like, okay, did I get everything? Did I marry who I wanted to marry? No, that didn't work out. But, did I get all the other things on my checklist that I thought was going to happen? And you're just amazed at how much you grow, the experiences you go through. So I always encourage men to journal, to chronicle your life, because it's your life. And nobody can tell it better than you can. And to be able to look back on your transformation over time is powerful.
Good morning. I just want to say thank you to Hartford Memorial for allowing you guys to have this meeting this morning, how important it is for our community. First off, you guys answered a lot of my whys, because I work in risk management and we do root cause analysis on accidents and incidents, and you answered a lot of those questions. But one question I still have in my mind is, I heard that black men are hesitant on going to the doctor and seeking help. And I keep asking myself, and I kept asking myself while I sat here, well, why is that? Drilling down to the real answers, the real root causes of the problem. I can remember when I was raised, I may have done something bad, got a whooping from mom or dad. He said, don't cry, man up. I'm gonna whoop your butt, but you better not cry. So I'm drilling back all the way to that and trying to figure out why is it to this day that we still have that issue. Number two is that was not a question. It was just it was in my head. The next thing was the young man sitting on the edge. I have been an avid runner for years, and I suffered an ACL, MCL, and meniscus tear, and I was down for about 3 years. And I went up to 289 pounds just by eating all day. And the reason why I'm 213 at 66 years old now is because I monitor what I put in, the type of fuel I put into my body. If I put it in there, I'm going to burn it and make sure that I stay balanced. So those are the couple things I wanted to talk about today, or just discuss today, and talk about why is it that black men are still hesitant on going to the doctor. And again, I work in risk management, and we ask the 5 whys to get to the root cause of a problem. And I think that maybe we need to continue to ask the whys. Thank you.
This is probably a two-part kind of deal on that. When I would take part, I want to ask Dr. Neighbors to take the next part on that. Hesitancy, I know it's clearly, there's several layers. One is fear of what we're going to say. One is pain. By once get stuck with a needle. Some of my biggest, let me see, I'm trying to figure out how to put this so Dr. Neighbors don't get mad at me up here. One of my, I guess the biggest challenges I put that is larger men tend to be the most fearful, I have found. I had a guy of 6'8", like 380 pounds, and that guy was crying like a little baby when he had to get his blood drawn. And it's not funny, it was a comical situation, only in that You know, he was always trying to play this tough guy role until that came up. And he's actually a personal friend of mine. That's the reason why I could joke with him about that. But a lot of it is that fear. I'm finding is that fear of the unknown and fear of discomfort. You know, and then again, you mentioned earlier about how what your parents told you. Because I'm gonna tell you, I grew up in a single parent household. My father died really young. I was only 7 years old when my father passed away. So, you know, my mom raised us essentially on her own. You know, I still got imprints of my mom's foot on my butt right now. And I say all that to say that she would get on me about that manning up stuff then, you know, and I couldn't cry and these things that probably impacted me now. But, you know, that was part of I think that fear factor is dealing with how do you deal with your emotions when you have to have these kind of challenges, because ain't nothing fun about going to a doctor. I'm a doctor, on my end is great, because, I mean, I'm the only one inflicting things. But when you're on the receiving end, and you have to worry about whether or not somebody's going to tell you something, you think you may die or may have some issue, you know, and it's a lot, there's so much complexities, I think, to why our individual communities are like that. I don't know all the answers. Dr. Neighbors probably could answer that much better than I. But from a medical perspective, I'm finding it's fear of the unknown and fear of pain, and then how people are going to perceive you. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I'll be very brief. And my research shows that it's fear. A lot of us I always wanted to be a tough guy, because I looked at my dad and he was tough. I wanted to be just like him. Being a tough guy has its problems. A lot of us men, we know we're afraid, but we just can't admit it. You know, we're trying to wear that mask. So I think the first one, I'll sign off on fear, and if it's not fear, it's avoidance. I know my problem was always, I got something better to do. I mean, I would miss appointments, skip appointments, change appointments. For me, my problem was I was always working. And I just thought I had to work, and I'll get to the health thing later. Big mistake. So we've got to make our health a priority. And again, I'll say things like this, start that process. So again, hats off to Collin for coming up with this idea. And I'm just very happy to be a part of it.
I have to say that I'm so impressed with this panel and what you've attempted to do, what you are doing. And the only thing that would make it greater is that we have every seat in the cathedral here filled, because that's just how important this message is. I really appreciate each of you being so upfront and honest. You know, I think for the African American community, for African American men, we face the dilemma of the emperor with no clothes on phenomenon. You know, we don't want to hear what we don't want to hear. And so each of you who have been so upfront and forthright, it's just been tremendously helpful. I just want to make sure that I'm getting all the facts right here in terms of what the information that you've given us. Let me get this right. African American men are at the top of the list in terms of morbidity, mortality, be it cancer, be it diabetes, be it heart disease. African American men are at the top of those morbidity tables. Is that correct?
That's, I tell you, the mortality more so than the morbidity. It depends on what it is. For cancer rates, interestingly, other than prostate, African American men and whites are pretty similar. The death rates are much higher. Okay. Because even if you look at women with breast cancer, more white women get breast cancer than black women, but more black women die from breast cancer than white women.
Well, that's the key. Yeah. It is, yeah, it's through the death. That's what I'm really trying to get to. And so that is shocking enough for me. Maybe I'm just absorbing all of this. And to me, that in of itself would signal to each and every one of us that this is something that is has to be dealt with on the forefront. We can't really afford not to make this priority number one. I can't imagine anything more urgent. And so again, I salute you gentlemen for putting this together. I wish there were more people here. I'm going to try to get as much of the word out as I possibly can in regards to what we have to do to make sure we know our numbers and to live in what should be the richest and most powerful country in the world. We should be able to live our lives without the difficulty that we're faced with. And information is a big part of that. So thank you.
One last comment I'll make about that aspect of structural racism, and I want to bring that up because that's a real issue that we do have in this country. If you look at, and I see this, and I was telling Dr. Neighbors, I'm doing some grad school work in public health, and one of the things I have been learning is when you look at like neighborhoods, like I said, when I come in here, I saw 7 liquor stores here, just driving down the street. You look at most African American neighborhoods, what type of grocery stores do they have there? What type of, do they have? They all have a check cash in place. I saw a bunch of those coming here too. It's almost designed to keep you at a certain place. The biggest thing I would say, and not to get political in here, but I always tell people, make sure you go vote, because a lot of times people don't let their voice be heard and they think there's no real reason to do that. But change only comes through unification. And, a lot of times it's like even this issue here, Collin and I spoke right before we got up here. He was thinking he was disappointing us because we didn't have as many people here. And I said, listen, man, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. You get 200 people say they're going to show up. If you get 30%, that's a lot. Because people just don't want to hear about health. They just don't. I think it's just that it's like to them, to most individuals, it's like, this is bad news I don't want to hear about. Now, if Beyonce was going to be here, I mean, you would have, like you said, every seat would be full. Then it'd be around the corner. But just where our priorities are. Our priorities are not to health. And it's unfortunate because that's why that life expectancy is different. But I say keep preaching, because I told Kyle, I said, I don't care if it's just one. If we touch one person today, then I feel like I've done my job. So I say, I told hats off. And I know it's frustrating when you see it because you hear something, you like what you hear, but just keep preaching that word out and keep telling people what you heard, because then you'll touch somebody, then they'll touch somebody, and maybe we can make a difference.
Again, let me join the chorus here and applaud this event, the presenters, and the people who came out. I have particular interest in being here this morning, and much of that has been conveyed here in the last few moments. Unification, family, extended impacts. What I haven't heard about, notwithstanding the research that Wayne, U of M, Michigan State are doing collectively, is the All of Us research project, which the National Institutes of Health is conducting. It's on a 10-year roll. I'm with LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. We're a national partner with NIH in the All of Us thing. Key to all of your work collectively and going on, as was cited here by one of the audience members, is we need to be accountable, but we need the research. We need the data in terms of trending things and finding ways for the system to improve its treatment of those things, our afflictions, if you will, or our challenges. I'm just here to encourage folks, and when we look at things on a macro scale, we don't have time for me to get into all my background on this, but trust me, I've got a cardiac story, I've got a diabetic story. They're kind of complement and round out a lot of this. Point being is, I think to the extent that we can, let's reach out and find ways to incorporate our resources in the community, whether it's our organizations, our churches, our macro entities that impact our society, into the All of Us research project over the next 10 years, so that our children and our grandchildren. I just became a great-grandfather for the second time 2 days ago, so I can tell you that, you know, the whole family thing takes on a whole new perspective with every generation, and I'm sure there are people, you know, in this audience with grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so forth. But you know, just to encourage folks to think about how we can incorporate everything else that's being done with the larger research study, All of Us, so that we can have the kind of data and information that helps us all do better.
One other thing you should remember is the All of Us study, you know, because a lot of these recommendations that we get from our physicians aren't telling us stuff that's just made up. Almost all of our physicians are evidence-based physicians. Their advice comes from scientific recommendations, and the science comes from data, and data is just another word for people signing up to answer questions so that the scientists can know what's working and what is not. So I encourage all of you to enroll in the All of Us investigation. I know I'm enrolled, and I was very pleasantly surprised that my now 44-year-old son also enrolled. And I never know if he's listening to a darn thing I'm saying to him. I just never know. As my dad once told me, are you listening to me? And you know, so all of us are like, you know, trying to be too cool for school, but if you keep talking, you'd be amazed at how many people are really listening. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, also on the research part, you know, unfortunately you know, I'm finding there's so few African Americans that participate in research studies, and I think it boils back down, but I get it. It boils back down to a trust factor or lack thereof. But I try to tell you know, a lot of people that bring that up to me, I say, well, but you personally, you've been taught that this is a trust issue now, but that's not something you personally experience based on what you're telling me. So some of you have to maybe take a step back and understand how research is done. And I would encourage you to, because that's the only way we can know that new recommendations that come out and change are going to be based on information that we can collect. It's not an issue of taking advantage of anybody. And I think if you look at most studies, they are like well written, all versed, everything is there for you to see how the study is being conducted. But it's going to be hard to really understand some of the things that are going to help our people more if we don't participate in that data collected, so that we can look at it and say, okay, this is a trend we're seeing in this X community under X circumstances. And unfortunately, so until we start doing that, we're still going to be somewhat behind the 8 ball on that. So I always encourage people, don't let your first blush impression steer you away from research. Just get the information. I mean, you will have a stack of stuff to read, you know, through, but it can be very vital to our future if we understand how to best really treat. And it's like Dr. Neighbor said, all my recommendations come from the American College of Cardiology. It's like a group of people get down in a room and they look at every study that's been done, and we come up with recommendations based on that information to say how you treat a condition. So we get that information. It's not just, you know, us just making this stuff up as we go along, but that's through research that's been done, that collected and analyzed, and we can come out with new recommendations. So I definitely like your statement, and I would encourage everybody to look at research studies being done. You have to participate in every one, but just look at something that may be something you feel comfortable with and participate.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I've known Dr. Neighbors a long time, and one thing he told me is whenever I come to his presentations, I always need to ask at least one question. So here's my question. But actually, first I have a comment. My comment was on how it was mentioned about trying to get the younger generation to get in the habit of, seeing a doctor and getting their screenings and so forth. And I think one of the issues is because younger people tend to have, less chronic conditions. They're not encouraged to go to the doctor as much. And so that's something I think we need to change in our culture, is encouraging young people to get in that habit. Kind of like what Dr. Neighbors was saying with his barber, he said, when should I stop, eating junk food? Dr. Neighbors said, now. We need to start getting the habit of going to the doctor now. So, one of the doctors I used to see as my PCP, when I was in my 20s, I would come in and the first thing he would say is, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm supposed to come in for my annual physical, so I now see someone else. But yeah, it's something in our cultures in our culture we just think of young people just not having problems, and we need, now I'm in my 30s and my blood pressure is increasing, and I'm happy that I continue to be in the habit of going to see the doctor, because it's even more important for me now. So that's my comment. My question was on, we talked about a lot of the foods that we should stay away from. What about the foods we should go towards? Because I think one of the barriers for me, and that is probably a barrier for a lot of people, is that when you eat some of the healthier foods, they're not as filling, they're not as satiating. And so, I think, if I eat like a hamburger or a slice of pizza, I'm good for the next 7 hours. I don't think about food for the next few hours. If I eat a salad, I'm thinking about food in the next hour. Sometimes I'm ready to eat my fingers off. So is there any advice for, you're making a shift to healthier foods and dealing with not feeling as full or satiated and things of that nature?
So, before I touch on the food, I'll say real quick, the most important thing we can do is drink water. And I can't say that enough. We should be drinking really nothing but water. I know that could be a challenge though, but we need to make sure that before we're eating, we're drinking water. After we eat, we're drinking water. And we really need to practice fasting more, because your body, just like when you're studying for a test, it can't absorb everything, simultaneously. You have to make sure that there's a span between when you're eating and when you begin to eat again. So, for example, one of the things that really worked well for me was I'd stop eating after 5:30, and I'd pick back up after I'd work out in the morning. I'd pick back up at around 8 or so and eat again. And it allowed my body to really digest, what did I do the day before? Maybe I had a cheat meal the day before, but that was okay because my body had readjusted to understanding that's not a normalcy anymore. It's more common that I'm going to put carrots and peas and grilled chicken and all the healthy things in my body. So we really have to focus in on fasting plus water plus, again, as everything we've been told since forever, right? The fruits, the vegetables, but so much of it comes down to when do we eat and how much water are we drinking?
Yeah, just a real quick answer, again, from the perspective of one who's got multiple chronic diseases. If I break it down to the simplest form, I try to stay away from things that are processed, and sometimes I say I just try to eat real food, the food that looks like it looks when it comes out of the ground or off the tree. So I love apple juice. I love orange juice. But that stuff is processed. So now my go-to is I'd rather eat an apple or eat an orange than to drink juice. So it's, it's just that simple, but it's just that complicated, because how do I stay away from those things that are loaded with sugar that when I drink it, they taste really good? The other thing that worked well for me, and this is why going to the doctor is so important, because doctors are, for many of us, kind of up on a pedestal. We respect everything that they did to get to that point. And, I was talking to my nephrologist, and he started asking me about food and my diet. And I'm like, what kind of doctor is this? I'm like, aren't you supposed to give me some pills? And he was breaking it down. He wanted to know what I was drinking. And I said, well, you know, I enjoy an occasional glass of Mountain Dew. And he said, don't do that. And then I said, but it's sugar-free Mountain Dew. He said, don't do that. And he was my kind of doctor because he was just that forceful. So I said, well, what am I supposed to drink? He said, water. I mean, you heard it right here. He said, water. So that day, I went home and I just poured out all that Mountain Dew. I had a stash. And I started drinking water at every meal, and that was very weird at the beginning. But surprisingly, it didn't take me that long. It was less than a week for me to go, oh, I can drink water. And then that great moment when I go, this water tastes really good. You know, all that other junk I've been drinking had been somehow masking the true taste of water. So, you know, those are just some things. There are many more stories like that, but it's got to be real food. Somebody mentioned frozen foods. Man, I used to be the king of the hungry man dinner, you know. I mean, I can't remember the last time I've had a hungry man dinner now, but
Do they still make those? I was going to ask you.
I have no idea. I'm not trying to find out. But all that stuff that I used to do was just terrible for me. So part of it is knowing what to do and what not to do, but then the other part is the self-discipline, the motivation, that first step. You know, if we have more time, well, one day I am going to ask Collin, you know, 'cause he did an amazing thing and he's still on track. It's that first step. For me, it's always that first step, you know, when I'm going to sit down to watch the NBA playoffs and everything in my body's going, nachos, junk food, you know, you're going to have a feast. And then another voice is saying, raw carrots, raw broccoli. Well, I know what I have to do. Ignorance is not an issue. Somehow I've got to go for the carrots and the broccoli as a snack as opposed to the stuff that I already know is not doing me any good. So that's what we got to talk about.
Good morning, gentlemen. First of all, let me echo the sentiments of everybody said earlier about your willingness to put yourself out here, provide leadership around this most important issue. My name is Robert Thornton, and I went on a health journey of my own about 5 years ago. I was 230 pounds. I'm 5'7". Actually, I was Plumpty Dumpty. And I didn't really recognize that I was Plumpty Dumpty. I mean, I knew I had put on a lot of weight over the years, and so, you know, you buy new suits, and you buy new suits, and you buy new suits, and I was just a fat man in new suits. But I decided to go on a health journey, and like I said, I lost 60 pounds in 14 weeks, and for the most part, I have kept it off for the last, now it's almost 7 years. I want to echo the sentiments of the young man up front that I heard speak earlier about how do we engage young people at a very earlier time in their lives and start educating them about how to live healthy, eat healthy, go to doctors, and do those kinds of things. And I'm wondering if there are strategies in place in some of your work. For example, I'm thinking about how do you gather captive audiences like the NAACP, the NCAA, who has sports programs all over the country. How do we connect into those kinds of organizations and they're all men. I mean, just the men's sports teams. If we did it at the high school level, the sport, how do we do, does it make sense to target those kinds of audiences? And if so, is there work or thoughts about how to do that?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that the unfortunate reality, and I brought this up before because we are in a capitalist society, I think about the NCAA tournament. I don't know if anybody watched that, but you know, the first commercial I saw about every time the game went on break was a Wendy's commercial. You know, and you know, the hamburgers and everything there, and you know, that's you know, I think carefully applied pressure is a way I think to do anything in this country. You know, get enough people together, they can apply pressure to get things done, is, I think, the key to all of that. So, you know, creating a buzz, you know, of what needs, you know, the challenges we have and what things need to be done. You know, I don't personally like social media personally, but I see the tool in which it's used, because that's what a lot of young kids are on that. Find the platform they're most on and start, you know, posting some things if they get some young, you know, call them influencers now, you know, I mean, because I'll be honest with you, I get so frustrated when anytime I get on doing a thing on Instagram or whatever, all I see is young ladies showing their bodies off. That's all they seem to want to do now. And, you know, and I'm not saying that, you know, that's something that you shouldn't do, but that should be your main focus in life, is that, when there's have so many other more important things that can be done. But this is where you have to change the mindset of where kids are now, what they deem as important. You know, we are seeing more younger people with chronic illnesses, and that's the unfortunate reality, and they're getting younger and younger. And my fear is as they get in the 40s, they're going to have a lot of medical problems. So I think, to me, to get like people who are interested together to say, how do we kind of force a position through, is the way out. That's the only way I can see that happening, because right now, well, I'm sure Wendy's paid $1 gazillion to get those commercials on. You know, and we don't have $1 gazillion, so we have to find other ways of doing it. But I know the platforms that their kids are on, I would say, to me, that's a first good place to start. And what I'm finding, and I had this conversation with a couple of people before we started today, was the biggest way, I think, to influence change is repetition of information. You know, we do, like, you think about how do you impact kids in a mentorship program. It's not a one weekend thing. It's a every week kind of thing where they see, you know, and you're being there, helping them, guiding them along, because otherwise they just go right back in the same environment they were in, and things just go back where they were. So repetition of information, I would say, is one of the key points of that. So to me, the more you do it, and I think that's where we failed with COVID vaccines. The naysayers had the mic, and they were going for it. And I think the medical community, we didn't do as good a job with that. We said a couple things, but we didn't force it and push it and kind of say this is the advantages. Because I was joking with somebody before we started. The biggest complaint people told me about COVID vaccines was they said, I don't know what's in it. That's why they won't take it. But I had more people ask me for Ozempic shots to lose weight. And when I had one, there was one of my COVID naysayers, when she came and asked me for it, I said, but you don't want that because you don't know what's in it. So, I mean, but we prioritize what we want to prioritize. So I think if we push that envelope, get people together and push with young folks and really get engaged, get other young people who are healthy and living that healthy lifestyle to push an envelope, because they're not going to listen to us. You know, I mean, they may listen some, but, you know, they're going to listen to each other more than they do, you know, us. So I think having that would be one way to go about it.
My short reaction to that excellent question is really going to depend on what happens once we all leave here today. There's a whole lot of power in this room right now to make those kinds of changes that you're talking about and that I dream about. We need powerful people, and we need money. It always takes a financial backing to start a movement that is going to have to run for decades. So it's what we all do after we get together, process this information. There's going to have to be another meeting, and another meeting, and a group of people who are going to make this a priority. You mentioned sports teams. I mean, I watch sports all the time. Most of us do not know that June is supposed to be Men's Health Month. This is when we should be really marketing. And Father's Day is Men's Health Day. Now, there are some people and some events that are going to happen in June accentuating men's health. But the problem is, after June, it seems like everything just kind of dissipates. So, you know, I would love to talk to you to see what your ideas are for how we can turn this into a movement and not, you know, just a single event. I mean, we already heard the good news from Dr. Levy that there's going to be another one of these partnered with Wayne State. So I can't wait for that next one to happen. And then after that one, there's going to be another one and another one. So that, I think that's what we have to do. This is the responsibility of men, to take care of men.
And first of all, let me say it's good to see you, Mr. Thornton. I'm glad you made it out. Thanks for coming. I believe it's going to take strong black men that are, I mean, when we're talking about the younger generation, over 35, that can look back and help to educate, help to motivate, because some of it is education, some of it is motivation. I had a lot of education. I didn't have much motivation. And it's going to take a strong group of black men like I had growing up. I had a strong father. I'm blessed to have my uncle here today. And it's going to take that village to really motivate and encourage the next generation to talk about health and the importance of health and the importance of eating properly and putting down the video game at some point and going out for that walk or going out for that run. I don't know about saying no to carrot cake, though. So.
First of all, I just want to commend you, brothers, for what you're doing, man. This is just incredible. It's difficult to get black men together to talk about health. And I'm on a mission to save lives for black men. And our group is upstairs, but to prevent type 2 diabetes and everything that you've talked about, trying to get men to go to the doctor, all the fear, changing your behavior. We're asking people to change their behavior that they've been doing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's difficult. Our program called the Men's Room doesn't cost anything to get in, but it's tough getting black men in. And, you know, as you talk about as we're younger, we think we're invincible and nothing's going to happen until a chronic disease hits us, and then boom. So we're on a mission to make changes. And the one thing I do see that we're seeing is that historically our women, they have been the ones that take our young boys to the doctor. And we're saying that we got to reverse those roles. So if our black men are taking our young boys to the doctor, they get into the habit of that. So they're, you know, that's what they see. They see their father taking them to the doctor, and as they get older, that's what they do. So that's how we're starting to change things. So we're upstairs. Commend you, brothers, for doing it. We're on a mission to save lives too, guys. So I'd love to talk to you a lot more, so I'll be happy to do that.
And this will be the last question, and then we'll have time to talk afterwards. But we do want to get people screened too. So.
It's just a suggestion. He can have the last question. But this is a wonderful panel, and I think it was mentioned that you know, a lot of seats here are available. So one of the things we can think about next time is kind of calling on our community trust makers, leaders, such as members of the Divine Nine, social fraternities, Alphas, Kappas, Qs, Sigmas. These organizations have, you know, hundreds of black men that on the graduate level, undergraduate level, that could fill these seats and really spread the information to the community.
And to that point, yes, we did a lot of outreach. We've done media around this. We've done outreach of the Divine Nines. I'm a member of the best fraternity in the world, 06. But I think a lot of it just comes down to, you know, it was Saturday morning, and we know everybody has things to do. I don't know if there ever is a good time, but we're going to keep the conversation going.
Just quickly, I know the hour is late, but you brought an element into this discussion, late into this discussion, that involves financing and politics. And I think most ideas are not going to be very successful if you don't have a budget. We followed the example of Dr. Levy at Wayne State, who broke outside of the walls and the confines of the medical school to become partners with the community. That means that you have to have the ability to have leadership to do that. The leadership right now, as you know, in this country is influenced by the politics and the money which follows the politics. I was on the board at the University of Michigan Medical School for several years, and we have to deal with a lot of issues. One of them was football. and we had the coaches come in and make presentations. In my first year on the board, as naive as I were, I asked about the graduation rates of the football team, which is majority. What graduation rate? It's black, which you don't talk about. That's an unwritten rule at that board table to talk about graduation rates of young men, mostly black, on that football team, okay? It was the same year we signed the healthiest contract with Nike, that little swish they wear on the uniforms, $1 gazillion. So I asked about graduation rates, and the coach says, this is an academic institution. We believe in serving the needs of da-da-da-da-da-da. And here at the University of Michigan, academics is number one. And football is number two. I said, Coach, I get it.
Well, yeah. Well, we appreciate everybody again for coming out, and we hope to keep the conversation going. As mentioned a number of times already, there is health screenings available. We encourage you to get screened. We'll keep in touch with you. If you register through the Eventbrite link, we have your information. And again, thank you so much for coming out. We hope you got something out of this. It meant a lot to the three of us to be up here.